Very few people know that Vikings possessed a heating invention so effective that it kept families warm through Arctic winters without burning firewood all night long. Even fewer realize this technology still exists, buried beneath centuries of forgotten knowledge, waiting to be rediscovered. And almost nobody understands that modern homes, with all our advanced materials and engineering degrees, still can't match what Norse settlers achieved over 1,000 years ago using nothing but stones, straw, and an understanding of physics that our civilization has somehow lost. Before we reveal exactly what this invention was and how it worked, drop a comment with where you're watching from. And if stories of lost ancient technology fascinate you, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to learn will change how you think about heat, survival, and the ground beneath your feet. The invention wasn't a furnace. It wasn't a special type of fire or an exotic fuel source. It was something far more brilliant, a system built into the floor itself that turned the entire longhouse into a living, breathing thermal machine. A technology so subtle that archaeologists didn't fully understand it until the late 20th century, and so effective that when researchers finally reconstructed it and lived in it through a Norwegian winter, they couldn't believe the results. But to understand why this invention mattered, you first need to understand the enemy Vikings were fighting. And it wasn't the enemy most people think. Cold doesn't kill the way movies show it. There are no dramatic freeze frames or cinematic blizzards that announce death's arrival. Cold kills quietly, patiently, starting not from the howling wind or falling snow, but from the frozen ground beneath your feet. This is the truth modern builders still overlook, the principle that gets people killed in survival situations even today. The ground steals your body heat faster than winter air ever could. It pulls warmth from your bones silently through direct contact, draining life hour after hour while you sleep, sit, or stand. Physics calls this conductive heat loss, the transfer of thermal energy through direct physical contact. Your body generates heat. The frozen earth beneath you is a massive cold sink with essentially infinite capacity to absorb that heat. Every second of contact is a one-way energy drain that your metabolism struggles to replace. In Scandinavia during the Viking Age, winter temperatures routinely plunged to -25 degrees Celsius or lower. The wind cut like blades. Snow drifts piled higher than a man's chest. But the wind wasn't the primary killer, the ground was. Sleep directly on frozen earth, even inside a shelter, even wrapped in furs, and you wake up weaker every morning. Your children get sick. Your elderly don't survive the season. Your settlement fails. Most civilizations faced with these conditions looked upward. They built thicker roofs, reinforced walls, and created massive hearths that blazed all night, consuming enormous amounts of precious firewood. They fought the symptoms while ignoring the disease. The Vikings noticed something different. They understood that if you want to survive northern winters, you don't start by fighting the air above you. You start by defeating the ground beneath you. And that insight, that single observation about where cold actually comes from, led to an invention that changed everything. Now, if you're enjoying this revelation about lost Viking knowledge, make sure you're subscribed because we're about to break down exactly how this floor system worked, layer by layer, and why modern science confirms it was genuinely brilliant engineering. Here's what makes this story even more remarkable. Modern humans have completely forgotten this principle. Today, when we talk about insulation, we obsess over roofs packed with fiberglass, walls stuffed with foam, and windows sealed against drafts. We spend thousands on HVAC systems and smart thermostats. We engineer comfort into every visible direction, except the one that matters most. Our modern floors are thermal disasters. Concrete slabs, the foundation of millions of contemporary homes, are among the worst offenders. Concrete is highly conductive. It drains heat from the human body far faster than stone or wood ever could. A modern house built on a concrete slab is essentially constructed on top of an enormous cold plate that siphons warmth 24 hours a day. And because concrete can't breathe, it traps moisture. That moisture grows colder, condenses, and creates the perfect environment for mold and structural decay. The result: homes that feel perpetually cold and damp even when the thermostat reads 20 degrees Celsius. Homes where you need constant heating just to maintain basic comfort. Homes that would kill you in a survival scenario where fuel was limited. In cold climates, modern studies confirm that as much as 70% of heat loss doesn't come from roofs or walls, it comes from the ground. We have engineered technological marvels in almost every direction while ignoring the fundamental physics that Vikings understood instinctively over a millennium ago. But the Vikings didn't have scientific instruments or thermal imaging cameras. They didn't have building codes or engineering degrees. What they had was consequences. Sleep on damp earth, and you watch your family get weaker. Build your floor wrong, and your settlement doesn't survive winter. The harsh landscape of Scandinavia, places like Skagafjord, Lofoten, Hedeby, and the frozen North Atlantic frontier, didn't forgive mistakes. So they observed. They experimented. They noticed that certain materials held heat better than others. That some floor configurations stayed dry while others bred dampness and cold. That the position of stones, the thickness of organic layers, and even the type of wood used for planking made measurable differences in survival rates. Over generations, this observation crystallized into a formalized system, the layered floor. An invention that very few people today even know existed, let alone understand. The genius of the Viking floor wasn't in any single component. It was in how multiple layers worked together, each serving a specific function, creating a complete thermal ecosystem that modern engineering still struggles to replicate. Let's break it down, starting from the bottom up. Layer 1. Breaking contact with the earth. The first and most critical step in the Viking floor system was one that seems almost too simple to matter. They raised the floor above the frozen ground. Not dramatically, just 10 to 40 centimeters depending on the region and available materials. This wasn't a high stilt house like those found in Southeast Asia. It was what modern architects might call a floating floor, a deliberate separation designed to interrupt the invisible assault from below. When you raise a floor even a hand's width above the soil, something remarkable happens in terms of physics. You sever the conductive bridge, the direct pathway through which cold and moisture travel from earth to living space. Your body no longer surrenders precious heat to the frozen ground at the same rate. The thermal drain slows dramatically. At the same time, you eliminate capillary moisture, the slow, steady rise of dampness through porous materials that can chill a room even without visible water. Ground moisture moves upward through soil and stone via capillary action, the same principle that lets plants draw water from roots to leaves. When your floor sits directly on earth, that moisture rises into your living space, making everything cold and damp. By lifting the floor, Vikings created a natural buffer zone, a pocket of air that stayed drier, warmer, and far more stable than the frozen world outside. This air gap functioned as the first line of defense, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Interestingly, this principle wasn't unique to Vikings. Traditional Japanese homes built in the Shoin-zukuri style also raised their floors to control moisture and maintain stable indoor climate. Different cultures, different landscapes, separated by thousands of miles, but the same fundamental truth. If you want to survive cold, you start by making sure the ground cannot directly touch you. For the Vikings, this elevation was only the beginning. Layer 2. The mineral foundation. Beneath every Viking floor that archaeologists have properly excavated lies evidence of a mineral system that functioned like a silent thermal engine. It started with gravel, loose, porous, and naturally draining. This wasn't decorative. Gravel allowed meltwater and ground moisture to escape downward rather than seep upward into the living space. It prevented the soil beneath the home from freezing into a solid block of ice and turning the entire structure into a radiating cold sink. On top of the gravel came a leveling layer of sand. Simple, stable, and incredibly effective at distributing weight and heat without trapping water. Sand particles packed together to create a firm base while maintaining enough porosity to let moisture continue its downward journey away from the house. But the most extraordinary element of the mineral layer was the stone. And this is where Viking engineering reveals itself as something far more sophisticated than primitive improvisation. The Vikings didn't just use any stones. They carefully selected specific types, primarily granite and gabbro, both dense igneous rocks with unusually high thermal mass. Thermal mass is the ability of a material to absorb, store, and slowly release heat. Water has high thermal mass, which is why coastal climates are more temperature stable than continental ones. Dense stone has even better thermal mass than water for building purposes because it doesn't evaporate or freeze. The Vikings positioned these high thermal mass stones in the subfloor where they could absorb heat from the hearth fire during the day or evening. Then, long after the flames died down and the family went to sleep, those stones would continue radiating warmth upward through the floor. The longhouse became, in effect, a primitive thermal battery, charging itself while the fire burned, and discharging gently through the cold night hours when fuel conservation mattered most. This wasn't accidental. Archaeological evidence proves it was deliberate engineering. At Borgund and Kopangen in Norway, excavations revealed stones with clear signs of thermal shock, fracture patterns that only occur when rocks are repeatedly heated and cooled in controlled environments over long periods. These weren't stones that happened to get warm. These were stones that had been used as heat storage devices, season after season, year after year. In Jorvik, modern-day York in England, researchers found thin layers of ash beneath subfloor stones, evidence that heated rocks had been deliberately placed there to radiate warmth upward into the living space. The ash marks the position where hot stones from the hearth were transferred to the floor system, a practice that would have been repeated daily during the coldest months. And at Hedeby in Denmark, one of the most important Viking trading centers, foundation stones were discovered with permanent reddish-brown staining, classic markers of long-term exposure to high heat. These weren't cooking stones or hearth surrounds. These were subfloor components that had spent decades absorbing and releasing thermal energy. Together, these archaeological findings tell a consistent story across hundreds of miles and different Viking settlements. The floor wasn't decoration. It wasn't rustic improvisation. It was a carefully engineered thermal system designed to capture, store, and slowly release heat using nothing but the physics of stone, air, and time. Layer 3. The organic insulation. Above the heated stones and mineral base came the materials that transformed the Viking floor from a passive heat sink into an active insulation system. Organic fibers chosen not for aesthetics but for their remarkable thermal properties. Straw was the primary component. With its hollow stems and naturally trapped air pockets, straw formed an excellent insulation layer. Air is one of nature's best insulators. It's why double-pane windows work, why down jackets are warm, and why foam insulation is full of tiny bubbles. Straw essentially packages air into a structural form that slows heat transfer while adding softness and flexibility underfoot. The Vikings didn't just throw down a thin layer and call it finished. In winter, families would thicken the straw layer significantly, sometimes doubling it, to create a denser blanket of insulation between the living space and the cold earth below. In summer, they would remove a portion of it to let the floor ventilate, keeping the house cool and preventing humidity from accumulating. This was modular insulation, adjustable, seasonal, responsive to changing conditions. A concept almost entirely absent in modern building design, yet incredibly effective in climates with dramatic seasonal swings. Reeds and rushes, harvested from coastal marshes and northern wetlands, contributed a different strength to the system. Their waxy surfaces provided exceptional moisture resistance, shedding dampness and keeping the layers beneath the wooden planks dry even during the wettest months. Unlike straw, which could rot if constantly wet, reeds maintained their structure and insulating properties in high-humidity environments. Raw wool appeared less frequently, but when it did, it offered unmatched warmth. Icelandic sagas mention wool used specifically under sleeping platforms, and for good reason. Wool insulates even when damp, resists decay far better than most natural fibers, and creates a remarkably comfortable surface. The Vikings understood that different areas of the floor could use different materials based on function. Sleeping areas got wool. High traffic zones got reeds. General living space got straw. All these materials shared one crucial characteristic that modern builders often miss: they breathed. They didn't create vapor barriers that trap moisture. They allowed air and humidity to move through the floor system naturally, preventing the deadly accumulation of cold, damp air beneath the living space. When warm indoor air meets a completely sealed cold layer within a floor assembly, it condenses. This is called interstitial condensation, and it's one of the primary causes of floor rot, mold growth, and structural failure in modern homes. The Vikings never faced this problem because their floors were never sealed tight enough to trap water vapor. The organic layer was porous, flexible, and designed to work with moisture movement rather than fight it. Finally, many Scandinavian households completed the organic layer with a coarse woven cloth, essentially a large mat crafted by the women of the household who understood exactly how to reinforce and protect the system. This textile added another thin layer of warmth, protected the straw beneath from constant foot traffic, and extended the lifespan of the organic materials. It was a small detail, one that's easy to overlook in archaeological records. But it was part of a larger pattern that defined Viking engineering. Every layer, every material, every adjustment served a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. Together, these organic fibers formed the living heart of a floor that did far more than support a home. It insulated. It regulated moisture. It adapted to seasons. And it turned ancient living spaces into warm refuges capable of withstanding some of the harshest winters on Earth, without requiring fires to burn all night long. Above all those carefully arranged layers, the raised foundation, the draining gravel, the heat-storing stones, the insulating straw, lay the final element that most people would assume was the simplest: thin wooden planks. But this surface layer was anything but simple. Its thinness was intentional, calculated, and critical to the entire system's success. Modern builders would look at Viking floor planks and call them inadequate. They were thinner than what we use today, often just 2 to 3 centimeters thick, sometimes less. They weren't perfectly flat or sealed tight. There were gaps between boards. To contemporary eyes, they would appear unfinished, even primitive. But the Vikings understood something crucial: wood needs to move. Seasons in Scandinavia swing violently between dampness and dryness, freezing and thawing. A rigid, sealed floor would crack, warp, or trap moisture beneath it, leading to rot and structural failure. A flexible, breathing floor could bend with the climate, expanding and contracting naturally without damage. Those gaps between planks weren't flaws, they were features. They allowed moist air to rise and escape instead of being trapped below, which meant the organic layers of straw and reed were far less likely to rot. The entire floor system could breathe, constantly venting small amounts of humidity while retaining heat. The wood itself mattered too. Vikings primarily used spruce or pine, but not just any spruce or pine. They selected timber grown slowly in the harsh Nordic climate. Trees that grow slowly in cold conditions develop unusually dense growth rings, tight, compressed fibers that make the wood naturally resistant to temperature loss and far better at retaining warmth than fast-grown lumber from milder regions. Modern forestry confirms this principle. Slow-grown Nordic pine has significantly better insulating properties than the same species grown quickly in warmer climates. The Vikings didn't have lab equipment to measure R values, but they knew from experience which trees made the warmest floors. This wooden layer completed a dynamic system. The floor wasn't a static construction sealed off from nature. It was a living interface, always adjusting, expanding in humidity, contracting in dryness, venting moisture upward, allowing the layers beneath to stay dry and functional. The Vikings designed it to work with the environment rather than fight it, allowing the entire structure to remain stable, warm, and dry during the harshest seasons. In a world where cold was relentless and firewood was precious, the floor's ability to breathe while retaining heat wasn't a luxury. It was the reason families survived. The complete thermal engine, when floor, walls, and roof work as one. To truly understand why very few people know about this Viking invention, you have to see their longhouses not as collections of separate parts, but as single integrated organisms. The floor, walls, and roof work together in synergy to trap heat, store it, and release it slowly, creating what modern engineers would call a passive heating system, except the Vikings built theirs 1,000 years before the term existed. Start with the roof. Viking longhouses often used turf roofs, thick layers of earth, grasses, and intertwined root systems piled 30 to 70 centimeters deep on top of wooden supports. To modern eyes, this looks quaint, rustic, maybe even backward. But it was insulation on a massive scale. The turf absorbed heat from the sun during daylight hours. It resisted penetration by freezing winds at night. And most importantly, it sealed warm air inside the longhouse. As the upper turf layers held warmth, the air beneath them naturally pressed downward due to thermal stratification. Warm air is less dense, but when trapped by a heavy insulating roof, it concentrates near the floor where the family actually lives, sleeps, and works. Then there were the walls. Viking longhouses were constructed from slow-grown pine and spruce with growth rings packed tightly together. These timbers acted as natural thermal barriers in ways that modern synthetic walls often fail to replicate. They didn't leak warmth rapidly. They didn't conduct cold efficiently. Instead, they held heat in place, preventing rapid temperature swings and stabilizing the indoor climate even as external conditions fluctuated wildly. When you combine the insulated turf roof with the thermal barrier walls and the heat-storing floor, something remarkable happens. The hearth doesn't need to burn all night. You can light a fire in the evening, let it heat the stones beneath the floor, and then allow it to die down to embers or go out completely. The stones continue radiating warmth upward through the floor. The turf roof traps that rising heat and pushes it back down. The wooden walls prevent it from escaping laterally. Everything works in harmony. The home becomes a closed thermal loop, a passive heating engine powered by stone, wood, soil, air, and the physics of heat retention. Even after the fire burns out at midnight, the house remains warm enough for life to continue in comfort. Not scorching hot, but stable, dry, and survivable. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was an ecosystem of materials and design principles refined over centuries of brutal trial and error in conditions where mistakes meant death. A winter night inside, what it actually felt like. Picture this scene, because it reveals why this invention mattered in ways that no amount of technical description can fully capture. Outside, the Arctic wind lashes across the valley, dragging the temperature down to -25 degrees Celsius. Snow piles thick on the turf roof, muffling every sound except the low, persistent growl of the storm. The landscape is a killing field, exposed skin freezes in minutes, and anyone caught outside without shelter won't survive the night. Inside the longhouse, the hearth's flames have faded to glowing embers. The family has deliberately let the fire burn down to save precious firewood for tomorrow. There's no blazing central fire anymore, no dramatic flames leaping upward. Just a soft orange glow from dying coals. Yet the room doesn't fall into bitter cold. Warmth lingers near the floor, concentrated exactly where the family sleeps. Children curl up close to it, wrapped in wool blankets. Their breath is soft and slow, the breathing of deep, comfortable sleep, not the shallow gasps of bodies fighting hypothermia. Their mother quietly adjusts the straw layer beneath a sleeping platform, spreading it with practiced hands to keep the warmth distribution even. A faint, comforting heat rises still from the stones that were warmed earlier in the evening. They radiate energy upward in a slow, steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the house itself. The floor remains warmer than the air above it, a quiet contradiction that modern thermodynamics fully supports but that most people would never expect. The family sleeps peacefully, surrounded by the protective architecture of their ancestors. Outside, winter continues its assault, carving ice along the edges of the world. But inside, all is calm. The longhouse breathes. The floor holds warmth like a living thing. The night stays at bay. And in this small pocket of engineered comfort, life endures exactly as it has for generations, not because Vikings had endless resources or magical technology, but because they understood the ground beneath their feet better than we do today. Archaeological proof. They weren't guessing, they were engineering. For centuries, people assumed the Viking floor was nothing more than rustic improvisation, a crude solution by people who didn't know any better. But archaeology tells a completely different story. Across northern Europe, excavations consistently reveal that this layered floor system was not an accident, not a regional quirk, and certainly not lucky guesswork. It was a standardized method, refined over generations and passed down like any other essential survival skill. In Jorvik, modern-day York, excavations uncovered unmistakable signs of multi-layered Viking floors. Beneath compacted earth and worn wooden planks lay thin traces of carbonized straw and ash, the signature of a heated stone system used repeatedly over many years. These layers weren't random. They were deliberately arranged and rebuilt as families replaced materials season after season, maintaining a system they knew worked. Farther north at Lofoten, Norway, researchers did something extraordinary. They reconstructed an entire Viking longhouse using only period-accurate techniques and materials. Then they lived in it through a Norwegian winter to test whether the floor system actually performed as described in sagas and historical accounts. The results were astonishing. Even after allowing the hearth fire to burn out completely, the indoor temperature remained far more stable than in modern wooden cabins of comparable size. The layered floor held heat exactly as the ancient builders intended. Researchers woke up warm despite no fire burning through the night, validation that this wasn't mythology or exaggeration, but genuine engineering that still works today. In Ribe, Denmark's oldest town, archaeologists found heavily compacted flooring showing layer upon layer of gravel, organic fiber, and smoothed earth, evidence of continuous use and ongoing maintenance over decades. These weren't temporary survival shelters. They were engineered living spaces designed to last for generations, with floor systems that families maintained and improved year after year. And in Iceland, turf houses built on nearly identical principles continued to be used all the way into the 20th century. Their floors followed the same construction pattern: raised foundations, mineral sublayers, organic insulation, breathable wood planking. The technique survived for over 1,000 years simply because it worked better than anything else available to people living in those conditions. Together, these findings paint an undeniable picture. The Viking floor was formalized technology, tested by climate, validated by archaeology, and preserved through culture. This was environmental engineering practiced long before the term existed, and it worked so well that very few modifications were needed across a millennium of use. Why modern architecture still fails where Vikings succeeded. Here's what makes this lost invention even more striking. Modern architecture, with all our advanced materials and computer modeling, still routinely ignores the principles that kept Viking families alive. We build homes that look impressive on paper but perform disastrously in real winter conditions. The worst offender, as mentioned earlier, is the concrete slab foundation. Concrete is a highly conductive material. It drains heat from the human body far faster than stone or wood. A modern home built on a concrete slab is essentially sitting on an enormous cold plate that siphons warmth 24 hours a day, requiring constant energy input just to maintain basic comfort. And because concrete can't breathe, moisture becomes trapped. That trapped moisture grows colder, condenses, and creates mold. The result is homes that feel perpetually damp and cold even when thermostats read warm temperatures. Exactly the problem Vikings solved by using breathing, layered floors. Modern insulation reveals another blind spot. We focus obsessively on horizontal insulation, walls and ceilings, while ignoring vertical heat drain through the floor, which is actually where the majority of heat loss occurs in cold climates. The Vikings, through direct experience and observation, optimized their homes against vertical thermal loss, the most dangerous form in a winter landscape. Ultimately, the Viking floor wins because of its elegant simplicity and natural adaptability. It doesn't trap moisture. It doesn't rot from within. It doesn't require artificial climate control or constant energy input. It balances heat naturally, breathes with the seasons, and maintains stability using materials that require almost no maintenance. It is sustainable design in its purest form, born from necessity, crafted by people who understood their environment better than we understand ours. How to build this system today? What makes the Viking floor truly remarkable is that its principles aren't locked in the past. You can recreate this system today with basic tools and inexpensive materials. And in many cold climate or off-grid situations, it will outperform modern flooring. Start with elevation. Raise your floor 10 to 15 centimeters above the ground using simple support posts or stacked stones. This breaks the conductive bridge and stops capillary moisture immediately. Once raised, lay down a 15 to 20 centimeter layer of gravel. This ensures excellent drainage and prevents ice formation beneath your shelter. Add a leveling layer of sand on top, about 5 centimeters, to distribute weight and create a firm base. Next comes the thermal mass layer. Collect dense stones, granite, basalt, or gabbro if available, and position them on top of the sand. These will be your heat batteries. If you have access to a fire or even sunlight, these stones will absorb warmth during the day and release it slowly through the night. For the organic insulation layer, spread straw or hay to a depth of 10 to 15 centimeters. If you have access to reeds, dried grasses, or raw wool, mix them in for better moisture control and additional warmth. In colder regions, you can double this layer thickness. Finally, seal the system with thin wooden planks, not thick, airtight boards, but breathable ones that allow moisture to rise and escape. Leave small gaps between boards to facilitate air movement. For additional heating efficiency, you can incorporate solar-heated stones during the day or place heated stones from a fire directly into the subfloor layers at night. They'll release warmth for hours, just as they did for Viking families a millennium ago. For survival shelters or bug-out structures, the advantages are profound. A floor that stays warm without constant fire means you can reduce smoke output, avoid revealing your location, and conserve fuel. For off-grid cabins in the mountains or remote forests, you can pair the Viking floor with a modern rocket mass heater to create a hybrid system that is both efficient and astonishingly fuel-efficient. And remember, using natural materials keeps maintenance simple. Gravel doesn't rot. Straw can be replaced seasonally. Wood breathes naturally. Stone never fails. The system is as close to foolproof as engineering gets. Cultural legacy, when engineering becomes living heritage. For the Vikings, the layered floor was never just a construction technique. It was tradition, responsibility, and cultural knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next. Every year as seasons shifted and long northern nights approached, families rebuilt parts of their floors. Children watched their parents lift worn planks, replace straw, add new reeds, level the sand beneath. These weren't just chores. They were lessons in survival. The knowledge of how to insulate a home, manage moisture, store heat in stone, and release it slowly became part of the fabric of Viking life. Their engineering was embedded in daily ritual, woven into stories and practice, shaping how each household prepared for winter. It was this continuity, this disciplined understanding of nature and energy, that allowed Vikings to thrive in regions where other civilizations couldn't endure. In lands where cold could kill the unprepared within hours, Norse families remained healthy and resilient for centuries. It wasn't brute strength or endless resources that sustained their settlements. It was knowledge, quiet, practical, and inherited. Knowledge that turned their homes into sanctuaries of warmth amid the unforgiving northern world. Conclusion: lessons that still hold power after 1,000 years. What kept Viking families alive during the harshest winters in human history wasn't advanced technology or unlimited resources. It was the ability to see danger where others saw none, and to solve it with patience, observation, and deep respect for nature's rules. Their floors, those humble layers of gravel, heated stone, straw, and breathing wood, stand as a reminder that the key to survival is often found not in what we build upward toward the sky, but in what we build downward into the earth beneath our feet. Modern societies overlook the ground beneath their homes, trusting concrete and foam insulation while ignoring the fundamental physics of heat loss. Yet 1,000 years ago, the Vikings solved this problem with materials anyone could gather and principles anyone can still apply. The fact that their designs remain effective today, that researchers living in reconstructed longhouses stay warm without modern heating, isn't coincidence. It's proof that ancient engineering can outlast entire eras of supposed innovation. So as you reflect on this hidden Viking invention that very few people know existed, consider what other lessons lie buried in the past, waiting to be rediscovered. Consider how much knowledge we've lost in our rush toward complexity. And consider whether the solutions we need for sustainable living might already exist, forgotten beneath centuries of progress that forgot to look down. If this journey into lost engineering has changed how you think about heat, survival, and the wisdom of ancient builders, make sure you subscribe. Together, we'll continue exploring the innovations that modern society forgot, one buried treasure at a time. Because sometimes the most advanced technology is the one that never needed electricity, never required a manual, and never stopped working for 1,000 years. The Vikings knew this. The ground remembers. And now, so do you.